nothing to worry about, given all the surveillance and other things happening all around us. So but it's something that we record so that, if people want to come back later and those who have missed it, if they want to watch it, they can do so. So that's why we have started recording these lectures. The same thing will happen with our online classes, that all the classes will get recorded so that you can also come and see the videos if you want to see them once again, or if you have missed the class, then also you can do that. Anyway, so let me begin my lecture. And so it's on farmers' movement, which you all know is going on for over 7 months at the border of Delhi. And if you take it from July last year, then it's almost 1 year old. So how it started, I hope all of you know a little bit about it. So can someone tell me that, which was first ordinance, then bill, and then finally was enacted by the parliament? Those 3 farm bills, which are now acts. So you don't have to tell me the title. If you just tell me what are the main issues there in each of these 3 bills. Why there was a need for 3 bills, and what are these bills trying to do, and why farmers are afraid or apprehensive, not afraid, apprehensive about the consequences of these farm laws. Can anyone tell me? Anyone can, unmute yourself and just go live.
So I can go ahead.
Okay.
So basically, the government proposed 3 bills as part of its farm revolution kind of thing. And so in the first act, it basically says that you are allowed to trade outside of the agricultural markets, which are designated areas of trade. So and that the state governments cannot impose taxes on those kind of trades. Secondly, it allows for contract-based farming, I guess, something between something has to do with industries and farmers, and yeah. And I'm not really sure about the third one because it just slipped out of my mind. But I guess it had to do something with the minimum support price, or
no, not quite. But yeah, we will come back to it. Anyone else? Pratesh just gave you the 2, which is the third one, which is not an act. It's an amendment to an existing act.
Sir, hello, sir. Can I come in here?
Yeah.
I think the third one is about the essential commodities.
Yes.
Certain products that are being added or taken away from the essential commodities list.
No, not that. Yeah, it's just that. Anyway, so let me come in, since please unmute yourself so that there's no background noise. So it's basically what happened is the 3 bills, which then came first as ordinance in June, and by July, farmers were up in arms, particularly in Punjab, and then it was tabled in the parliament, and in September, those were enacted, passed by voice vote in the parliament by both the houses, the upper and the lower houses, and they became act. So the first act, now the titles are very long. Now all the new bills that are coming in India are very long names. So what we will do for simplicity is that the first one is about, as Pramath says, that it's popularly now known as APMC Bypass Act, which means that the APMC means Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee. Now these are enacted by the state governments, and through which the markets for agricultural produce are there in every states. And by law, only few, most of the commodities are supposed to be sold through this APMC market, or which are also known as the mandis. Now, in reality, what happens that almost 75% of the agricultural produce are sold outside this APMC market. But what the state governments do is that if you sell it in the mandi, then there is a mandi tax plus an handling charge, handling fee. So in Punjab, it is about, it's quite substantial. It's 6 plus 2.5, so I think 8.5 total is the taxation amount of the total transaction amount. And there, through which Punjab government earns 3,500 crores every year through these mandis. Now, these mandis, when this produce gets sold outside the APMC market, then what happens is the government still charges fees. So even if it's not getting sold in the APMC market, which are managed and maintained and renovated by the government, the government can still charge the fees. And this is done so that there's a parity. Now, what is the problem with the APMC market? Why people are selling outside most of it? One is that sometimes the various supply chains are designed in such a way that, there are various mechanisms through which companies or individuals can buy agricultural produce. Then there is also an issue with the market, APMC market structure itself, because these markets are controlled by commissioning agents or artiyas who are licensed by the government, and they control the market. So entry and exit in the market is controlled by them. So it's not a free market. If you and I tomorrow decide to get into food grain trade, and we try to go to any market in Punjab, Haryana, or any Madhya Pradesh and try to buy grain, we will not be able to do it. We need license to do that. So the idea of the first act is to liberalize this APMC market. Now, directly it is not saying banning or dismantling the APMCs markets, the mandis. What it is trying to do is that, okay, they're saying that, okay, fine, you continue with the APMC market, but if the traders and the farmers, they decide to transact outside the APMC market, they should be allowed to do without being taxed. So the state governments cannot tax them, which means that you can create these parallel markets at anywhere in the state, and the state governments will be able to do nothing about it. So that's why it is called the APMC Bypass Act, popularly. Now, on paper, it sounds fascinating because now all the barriers are gone, the commissioning agents and the artiyas and their collusions in the market, the cartels that they form in the market, those are gone. You have a free market dynamics, which can therefore mean that the transaction can happen directly between the farmer and the purchasing party, and therefore the farmers stand to gain more. Now, again, then the question, which I will ask you, and later on, that why would, when it on the paper it sounds so good, that the markets are liberalized, the intermediaries are taken off, there is no extra charges that one has to pay just to transact. So why is the farmers? It seems to be on, it will benefit the farmers, but why don't they think so? Think about it. I will come back to it. So the second one, as Pramath has told you, is about contract farming. Contract farming is basically, what is contract? Like if you rent, say for instance, I'm living in a rented apartment. So there's a landlord and I'm the tenant. And between us, there's an agreement that I will maintain the house, not burn it down, not destroy the house or do any of such things. Plus we will agree to a price, which is the rent here, which I will have to pay at whatever every, by the 7th of a month or the 2nd of every month, I'll have to pay the rent. And so on. So various clauses can be put together. So there's an agreement between us. So similarly, in agricultural production, if the companies want to buy certain things, they can go to the farmers who owns the land and tell them that we want you to produce, this kind of potatoes or that kind of chilies and so on, and tomatoes, and this is a specification, this is the quality control that you will have to do, and for which every ton or kilo we will pay you this much amount at the end of it. And so there is a certain period of time for which this engagement will happen. So all of this will be in a written format. Now, what are the liabilities that will also be mentioned? So contract farming is that. Contract farming is this agreement between the purchaser and the grower. So the farmer can enter into a contract with someone to grow a particular type of grain. Now, this is not something new in India. This has happened earlier. For instance, Pepsi, for a very long time, had engaged with the farmers in Punjab to grow potatoes. So when you see the Lay's potato chips, now those are all, comes out of a particular type of potato. It's not a random potato which is bought in the market. So there's a specific type of potato that Pepsi has developed, and that is given to the farmers to grow. Now the problem there is many-fold. One is that what people have realized is that this contract is very nebulous, because if the open market price is higher, which means the price of potatoes outside is higher than what the farmers have agreed to sell to Pepsi, then what might happen is that the farmers will have the tendency to sell it off in the middle of the night. They will take out potatoes and sell it off outside because they're getting better price than what Pepsi will offer. Similarly, on the Pepsi side, if the market price collapses, then they will think, say they contracted at 10, and now the price has gone down to 8. So Pepsi will think, why should we buy potatoes at 10 when the potatoes are available for 8? So they might not take the entire potato. They might reject many potatoes on the, citing the quality issues, and then farmer would be at loss. So it's always, there's a problem with that, both the sides breaking out of this contract. But the most important thing that the farmers have pointed out in this experience that, all over India, it has been seen that what happens in the contract farming is that because the type of crops which are the farmers grow, the type of intensity with which these crops are grown, the fertilizers, the pesticides, and all of that. So what happens is that the quality of soil degrades very rapidly. So after the contract period, say of 3 years, 5 years, then the production starts going down. The companies will not renew the contract. So when that happens, the farmer is left with a land which has been degraded, whose fertility has gone down. So this has an impact on the soil of the farmer's land, of the agricultural land. So that's one issue here. And the third one is the amendment in the Essential Commodities Act. Now, what was the Essential Commodities Act? If you see that when India became independent, right before that, in 1943, around the World War II, there was a massive food shortage in the country because food grains were diverted for consumption of the British and American troops who were stationed in various cities of India. Particularly in Bengal, it created a massive famine, and millions of people died in that famine. So India comes out of that experience, and throughout the 40s, 50s, there were drought and food crisis. India even used to import wheat from USA to feed its people. And therefore, India had to launch this green revolution to become self-sufficient in food. So food availability and food price is always a policy concern in India, that how to ensure that enough food is available in the country and the prices are lower so that people can buy. Now, which is known as this inflation, the price can go up and it will go out of reach of common people. So to prevent that, and why there's a fluctuation of pricing? Because of hoarding, that the traders might buy food grains at a huge quantity and then they might store those grains. It could be grains, it could be potatoes, onions, whatever, pulses, and they will create artificial crisis in the market. And when the prices start shooting up, they will start releasing it from their godowns and warehouses. So, or cold storages. And therefore, they will reap the benefit of the high food price. Now, high food price is not very politically, palatable thing. Most of the governments will find it difficult to stay in power if the food prices are very high or there is a massive inflation in prices. So to check that, to check hoarding, there is this Essential Commodities Act. So there's a list of items in that list which one can store only up to a limit. So this amendment, what this amendment has done, 2020 amendment, is that it has removed this storage limit. And it now allows all these items which can be purchased in bulk. So it allows two things, so purchase in bulk and unlimited storage, which means that there is also no limit on the time period for which these grains can be stored. And so again, farmers see, they sniff some conspiracy here, which is linked with the first one. The second one, contract farming, because it's dependent on the farmer's willingness, that whether they want to enter into contract or not. People are not happy with it. Farmers are not very happy with it, but they're also not so strongly against it. But the first one, the APMC Bypass Act and this Essential Commodities Amendment, these are the two things which has made them extremely fearful of the changes which are taking place in the Indian agriculture, particularly the marketing of the agricultural produce. So now can someone unmute and tell me what are those farmers' apprehension? Why they are afraid of liberalization of agricultural markets, number one. And number two, why they are apprehensive about the unlimited storage and bulk purchase, which could be good. No, farmers, they're producing rice, wheat, sugarcane, whatever, and then they want to sell it. And here comes someone who wants to buy everything. So if you have produced 100 tons, and earlier there were 2 or 3 people who used to buy it from you, now here one person will buy all of it from your, and your headache is gone. But farmers seem to be unhappy. They seem to be unhappy about this. Why?
So first of all, because someone will buy such bulk amount in bulk amount, because of that they can fluctuate prices according to their needs, because they have so much in store with them. And second of all, minimum support price is not guaranteed by the government. Therefore, they are also apprehensive about that.
No, minimum support price was never guaranteed. It was always, it's announced by the government at the when the harvest season comes in. That time the government will announce the price. There's an agricultural prices committee which meets, and then they decide the price, and then they will declare that. Yeah.
But sir, in this new bill, they haven't written it down as such. Means that is why they are also they are kind of afraid of that also. It is not given in written by the government.
Mm-hmm.
So they are skeptical about it.
That's the demand, because they see that government is going to bring this massive transformation of agricultural marketing. So they want the MSP to be now enacted, which means that it has to be guaranteed. So yeah, Antara.
Yes, sir. So talking about how government sees it as liberalization of farmers. So farmers have this apprehension that it's not exactly liberalization, but privatization or corporatization of agriculture, because they can come into unfavorable contracts with the private entities and might be held in some legal clauses which farmers won't understand. So in such a way, the bond or the contract would be unfavorable to the farmers.
Yeah, you are right, because that's their apprehension. So what their apprehension is that as of now, it's about a market, and when you look into market, there's a politics in the market, there's power in the market. So what we have, so when analytically or theoretically, when we try to understand market, market is a field, right? It's like a football field. And there you have, like the players, you have all these agents, people who gather to transact. So just imagine the football as the wheat or paddy, and then you have the players on both sides. So one is the buyer, another is the seller. The farmers are the sellers, and then there are buyers. Now the problem here is that there are not necessarily direct buyers. There could be these commissioning agents who will buy on behalf of someone, and the traders. There can be multiple parties in that, layers of that. So, say for instance, when you go to a Spencer, food market, you might get a packaged rice, but if you go that how it has moved from the field to this packet, you'll find various entities in between, right? So this field, this football field called market, now has many agents in it, right? So there's a power. So everybody, it depends on bargaining position of that. Who has? So if the farmers are weak, they will not get good price. Similarly, if so there has to be some bargaining, and MSP and other devices to create this bargaining position. Why MSP? Because MSP gives a floor price, beyond which farmers will, if the prices in the open market drops below the MSP, then government will procure. Government will support them. So there's a minimum support price, which means that farmers now have, when they go to this football field called market, they know that, okay, this is the minimum that we will get, we are assured. So which means they will not be at loss. And the MSP is calculated in such a way that it gives farmers a certain amount of profit. So if the traders come and pay them more than the MSP, then farmers obviously are assured of a profit. So to increase the bargaining power of the farmer, this MSP has been created. Now what they feel is that, and the other thing is that because farmers have the unions and they have worked, and the state is involved into this APMC market, or these commissioning agents are licensed, so they over the years have gained certain power or a relationship with these commissioning agents. So even if commissioning agents, will always try to pay them lower price and so on, but still they have some bargaining position, because most of these Arhatiyas commissioning agents are also from the local area. So they use the social power over those people. So they bring the social power, they bring their caste power in the market to control all these other areas. Now their fear is that when the state goes away, when this Arhatiyas goes away, and instead of the smaller purchasers, you have these massive corporates who will come and buy things in bulk, then what will happen? For first few years, they might be given better price. And as these other players will, the APMC market will start collapsing, the Arhatiyas will go, or the commissioning agents will go out of business, then what will happen? These corporates will be powerful and they will have a monopsony. So there are two things, right? Monopoly and monopsony. Monopoly is where you have the few companies. Monopsony is where you have the few buyers. And monopoly is where you have few sellers. So this is a monopsony market. So few buyers will control and then they will. We have seen that in India recently, and that's what has caused farmers fear. Can you name it? We have seen that. In one sector which all of us use, most probably you are using right now.
So in the Jio thing, phone.
Exactly. So what has happened in India in the telephone market, in the mobile telephone, you had many companies, Vodafone, Idea, Airtel, this, that. And then comes Jio with 4G technology. It leapfrogs. It didn't exist through, all this 1G, 2G kind of thing. It came straight into the 4G, and it gave SIMs for free. The data was extremely cheap, unlimited data, all of that happened. And overnight, many people started switching to Jio from their networks. Airtel was in crisis, Vodafone was in crisis, Idea was in crisis. So what we have seen, Idea and Vodafone could not exist as independent companies. They merged into one single company. They call themselves a VI and all of that. Airtel started, ad campaign to attract people. They are still struggling. So all of it in the last, 5 years or maybe 8 years, there's a massive change. Where Jio now controls. Not only that, in the Jio platform now you have Facebook, Google. Everybody has invested into that platform, and so all of a sudden we have seen a restructuring of a very advanced market, that a new player can come and completely change the market structure. So the farmers feared similar type of thing in case of agriculture market. That initially, all these traders will come like Jio get free data, almost cheap, free SIM, cheap data, and all of that. The new corporates will come, the agricultural corporate sector will come, and then they will, for 3-5 years, they will pay very good price, and outside the APMC, much higher than MSP, and all the farmers will start queuing up and selling up there. And in 5 years, all these commissioning agents and the APMC market will collapse, and then you will have only few buyers facing all the farmers, and they think that their bargaining position will go down. And that is what has prompted this movement, right? So now let us get into this movement. Now, what from July onwards, what we saw is a massive movement. And one of the, perhaps the nucleus of this movement is in the Delhi-Haryana border called Singhu. And that is about 10 kilometers from our campus. It's right on our doorstep. And from 26th November, when they started coming, gave the call of Delhi Chalo, and then finally they arrived in early December. From there to the 26th of January, before that incident happened, we saw an enormous amount of people. Like about 25 kilometers along the highway, there was a tent city. Like there were 10 lakhs or even more than people there in only one. Then there is another Tikri border and Ghaziabad border, Ghazipur border, and various parts of it. So this is a movement which in a way came from, nobody expected this movement to be so big, like millions of farmers joining in. Now what happened is that if you look, and when we will study, in the public policy, we'll get to know about the various kind of policies which took place and the various interest groups which exist in the society. So farmers throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were seen as a constituency, as a powerful constituency, particularly after the Green Revolution. That consolidated in the northwestern India, it consolidated them. So is in Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, parts of Andhra Pradesh. These are extremely strong mobilization which took place, which then prompted two things. If you have noticed that Chaudhary Charan Singh became prime minister, who comes from this farmers' lobby. For a very briefly, he lasted for 3 months. No, not 3 months. I think he was prime minister of India for 27 days in 1979. And then gradually throughout the 80s and 90s, they were extremely strong. Like, Devilal was the deputy prime minister. So they were as a constituency. Then after liberalization from 1990s onwards, by the end of 1990s, it all of a sudden seemed that the farmers no longer matter, that they are no longer a political actor in India. Rather, the new industrial class which has come, the capitalist class, the middle class which has emerged in India, completely anew, or the technology sector which has emerged in India. Now, these are the players in India who control the main interest they define the main interest in the society, that what will happen, what the policies should be. So people wrote off throughout the 2000 and in the last 20 years, people, political scientists, policy makers, sociologists, everywhere, you will find that they didn't matter. And all these farming communities, which most of the time are also from, as you might already know, that they are from the dominant caste group. So, for instance, in Punjab and Haryana, it is the Jat. In southern Haryana, it is the Yadavs or Ahirs. Western UP is the Jat. Gujarat, you have the Patels. in Maharashtra, you have the Marathas. In Karnataka, you have the Lingas and Bhakkalingas. In Andhra Pradesh, you have the Kammas and Reddis. So these are the strong, powerful caste group who are the landowners and who are participant in Green Revolution and beneficiary of that. And these are the people who formed their own political parties as well. So they are still very strong. So you cannot simply ignore them. Now, what happened when their farming identity went down? Then their caste identity became much more stronger, and then through that they would negotiate with the policy-making apparatuses and try to gain, their share. Now, those kind of change, all of a sudden, from nowhere, then this movement comes up, and so in a way that it indicates that the farmers have returned as political actors. So the obituaries which were written about the farmers were premature. The farmers have now got a rebirth and they have returned to the Indian politics. And therefore, not only politics, because politics and policy is interconnected. So they are now to be reconsidered by the state. And so that's in a way is an interesting feature of this movement. And what we have seen is that after 27th January, when Rakesh Tikayat was forcefully removed, was about to be removed, he cried, and then the entire Western UP got mobilized, and then the people landed up there. And then from then, the movement has spread all around to eastern Rajasthan, the entire Western UP, Haryana, and Punjab, and various other states, of course. Now, these are the areas which in 1980s also had seen a very powerful movement. It was at the peak of that farmers movement. What I was just a few minutes back, I was telling you that the farmers as political actor in India, in Indian politics, where they matter, not only that their members became the prime minister, they became deputy prime minister, they had some of the, just a second. Sorry, the problem of quarantine and in the lockdown that we are all talking to you from our homes, and then there are people pressing the calling bell. So something came and I had to go and attend them. So sorry. So as I was telling you that the 1980s, so it shows that Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and some of the big posts that are there all were occupied by the farming community. So it shows the powerful. Similarly, if you see in Maharashtra, for instance, NCPA, those of you are from Maharashtra will know that Sharad Pawar represents that sugarcane lobby and how strong they are. Similarly, if you go to Andhra Pradesh, you will see the same thing. So, so what is the difference? Now, the point is this, that farmers have returned, but does it signify that we have gone back to 1980s? Is it the same repetition of that? Is the history repeating, is the repeating itself? And there, I think, or is it the Jat communities, or the Jat is a wrong word here, the dominant caste groups are trying to reassert themselves, who had lost ground, are trying to regroup and reassert themselves into the Indian politics. An understanding of this way is important as students of public policy, because what it does is that we will try, when we start the program, you will realize that public policy is about contestation about the resources, about the resource allocation, how resources get, who is going to get what, and how this will be distributed. That is the crux, the main question that public policy attends to. And in a democracy, public policy is the apparatus through which this is settled. Otherwise, what will happen? If you are Sudan, You group, you buy your own arms, I buy my own arms, and we fight and we decide who will control what. In democratic politics, where all these parties, etc., there, so the negotiation happens that formally let us find out a framework through which we will distribute resources. And then there are normal way of distribution which happens in the market, and then there will be losers of the market whom we will compensate through social welfare, through various other means. So that's how the public policy operates. In this, public policy becomes the, in a way, is the shadow of politics in it, in a democratic country. In most of the democratic countries, therefore, public policy becomes important because that will determine who gets what, that framework. Now, if you can influence that framework, means your group can extract more from the whole of the nation at the cost of others. So whoever is powerful are going to bargain more. So is it a bargaining, the reworking of this, a balance of power between various groups which is taking place. So this is what you will see throughout the course, whatever you do, economics, sociology, politics, everywhere you will see a shadow of that. That would be at the back of all of these discussions. That what is the fair way of distributing. Now, what happens? Therefore, I thought that it's important to go back to and see what was happening in the 70s and 80s, and then try to compare with that, so that we get a better sense of what is happening around us. We do see on TV farmers, extremely angry. You see them, right now they are in Jantar Mantar. You see them, but watching TV will not always, you can hear their voice. They will articulate certain demands and their apprehensions, but that doesn't help us in analytically understand what is at stake here. So what was happening in 70s and 80s is that after Green Revolution, which started in 65-66 in India, the profitability started going down by the late 70s. And that prompted the farmers to reorganize and ask for better subsidies. Subsidies in inputs like fertilizer, pesticides, and subsidies in electricity, because they need, this is a new mechanized farming, so they are using pumps to draw water. So for that, they would demand, almost free electricity. In many parts, there are free electricity. They would also demand, and which they got away, is that free agricultural income. There is no tax on agricultural income in India. So these are the demands that they had. So these are the demands which they would place before the state, and the state will respond. Similarly, they will also demand a better minimum support price to increase it every year. So the government, they will get out, they will do the rail roko, they will demonstrate on the street, they will call for strikes. All the things that you see now was also happening then. So there are two streams in which it moves. So Punjab again was the leader in this. Punjab farmers were the first one to organize themselves, first into Punjab Jamindara, Khedbari Jamindara Union, which then later converted itself into Bharatiya Kisan Union. And similarly, in the Western UP, under Charan Singh, similar BKU came in. And then, as this farmers' agitation was going on, Punjab had a setback. In 1984, after Operation Blue Star, where the Indian Army went inside the Golden Temple and destroy parts of that to capture Bhindranwale, so that brought a massive kind of an upheaval in the Sikh communities. And then, as we know, that there were various kind of insurgency started in the state. The militancy started, and the state went into under president's rule. And within that, no public gathering was allowed. Similar to what we now have with the COVID, that there is ban on public gatherings. So similar thing happened in Punjab after 1984, which also meant that all the farmers' union had to stop all their activity. From 1984 to 1992, there was no activity. In between, by 89, all these farmers' leaders themselves started fighting between themselves, fighting amongst themselves. which led to the split in this BKU, and everybody started their own BKU. So that's why today you find in this, farmers movement, you will find BKU, Bharatiya Kisan Union, and the bracket becomes important because bracket will have various kind of, bracket will have MAN, bracket will have Dandola, Ekta Ugraha, Charuni, all kind of. So there was a split in the Punjab BKU. And when Punjab was going down in the farmers' activity, in Western UP, the farmers' movement was ascending. So there, this person called Mahendra Singh Tikayat was an associate of Chaudhry Charan Singh. He took over BKU and started reorganizing. What he did, Charan Singh's time, he brought in various caste groups together, and that was known as the Ajgar, AJAR, which stands for Ahir or Yadavs, J for Jat. Then you had Gujjars and Rajputs. There were also relationships with Muslim, which cemented during Mahendra Singh Tikayat's time. So then this new grouping was called Majgar, Muslim, Ahir, Jat, Gujjar, and Rajput. That made it extremely strong because all the dominant landowners came within the fold of this movement, irrespective of their caste and religion. Then what happened? Mahendra Singh Tikayat realized that to make this movement even stronger, so that it doesn't look like an interest group politics, which means that only the rich farmers are fighting with the state, and the state might not listen because they will say you are not representative of the whole society. So what he did, he started a relationship with the Dalits and the Kashyaks, the so-called lower caste in these areas. So that then created, and what he did is that because in India, as you know, caste is the most important aspect of our social life, and there's a question of dignity and humiliation and stigma. So the Dalits would be humiliated in various ways. So what Mahendra Singh Tikayat did is that when the Dalits would visit his house, he will make them sit on the same charpot that he is sitting. Earlier, other leaders would make them stand or sit on the floor, but he is the one who offered them the chair and listen to them. And most of the time, this Dalits problem would be one of these Jat or Ahir or Gujjars with whom they will have problem, and Tikayat will play the role of neutral arbitrator. So he will mediate in this conflict and give verdict even in favor of Dalits if required against his own community. So that then gained trust. So what happened through all of this is a very strong social mobilization which took place. So when we say farmers, it is slightly misleading because under that meta concept of or meta identity of farmer, you had all these social groups who were part of it, which made it very strong. And through that, they would place various demands, and most of the time they will get away with it. Now what happened is by late 80s, three things happened in India. So which is known as you would know, that Mandal, Mandir, sometimes people call it Kamandal. So Mandal, Mandir, Market. So 3 M's as people popularly call it. These are the massive change which happened. So of these 3 M's, the first one is Mandal. Mandal is the Mandal Commission, which was established again by the emergence of the OBC politics, and which gave reservation to the OBCs for the first time, which meant that these reservations are going to come from the general caste categories. So the general caste categories all of a sudden became extremely threatened that their share of jobs and in the educational institutions, that in the public education institutions, the seats will be taken away by others. So India saw a very bitter mobilization around that. Now in the late 80s, Kanshiram created DS4 and later BSP, that Bahujan Samaj Party. through that, particularly in UP, he and Punjab and Haryana, but mostly in UP, he mobilized the Dalits. So what happened between this Mandal and the emergence of the Dalit politics is that this Mazgar started becoming weaker. So what happened here is that the Dalits went out of the relationship that they had built up. They went with the BSP out of the fold of these farmers movements and became assertive. And most of the time they would no longer respect or listen to the upper caste boys. So it was a lot of adolescent fight which took place. And because the Jad, particularly the Jats were not, so the Yadavs, the Ahir of the Ajgars, Ahir A, Yadavs, they went with the Mulayam Singh's party. So again, one alphabet was missing from this thing. And with then the Jats were not part of the OBC. Gujjars were, so Rajput and Jats were all of a sudden found themselves against the Mandal Commission. So all of a sudden this Mazgar started collapsing. Then the second thing which happened is the rise of the Ram Mandir campaign, that demolition of Babri Masjid and the construction of the Ram Mandir in its place. That movement under L.K. Advani, started from Gujarat and then ended up through Bihar where it was stopped by Lalu Prasad, but it galvanized and mobilized the society enormously. So all of a sudden, the upper caste who were threatened by the OBC and the Dalits, they found a new political party which will articulate their views. So there was in northern India, there was a massive shift in the upper caste towards BJP. So again, in that, the Jats and the Rajput all of a sudden now had to move away from their farming identity to their Hindu upper caste identity, and they started moving towards BJP. So that then weakened this foundation. Now, as they started moving towards BJP, the Muslims were threatened. So Muslims started moving towards another formation, which is towards Mulayam Singh's party or Charan Singh's son's party, which is the RLD, Rashtriya Lok Dal. So they started moving towards that. And the third blow which came to this farmers movement at that time was the liberalization. So as liberalization came in, the farming communities, the newer generation, the younger people at that time, they would not see their future in this farming. They would see that they need to step out of farming, and liberalization for them provided a ladder that how to, or a stepping stone to move out of agriculture and into the new economy. They thought we can get educated into the technical education, we can become engineer, we can become doctor and so on, and or do an MBA and become part of the managerial class in India. And we will live in the new, who wants to live in the villages any longer and drive your tractor and so on, we will go and live in cities in Noida, Gurgaon, Bangalore and all these new spaces, or Pune, the new economy which developed, we will go and live in these places. And so there was a cultural change, the change in the aspiration of these farming communities, the younger generation. And farming families themselves thought that this is the way out, because if the earning from the agriculture is continuously going down. There's the so to avoid that, it might be a good idea to sell off part of the land, educate particularly the boys. There's a gender bias there, and then educate them, and so that they become the managers and they become part of the white collar market, job market in the economy. So all of this meant these three things: the Mandir, Mandal, and the market, completely shattered through these constituencies. And that is at the heart of the decline of the farmers' movement. Now, after experiencing the market, that this transformation from agriculture to capitalism, or agriculture to industrial or service economy, that did not take place. It got suspended somewhere. Then people are very worried about the market and its capacity to change them. So they rather think that if the market comes back now, what they have as a leverage is their land. Even that might go away, because if they start losing on their farming activities, in the the market is controlled by few corporates, and then they start earning even less, then gradually there will be a point when they will be forced to quit agriculture. And if they do that, then they will have to either lease out or sell their land. Now, what has happened in that process, their apprehension in the future is that the children did not, all of them did not transition into the service and the industrial economy. That is, they could not move out of agriculture completely. And now, on the other hand, even there, whatever they have, they will have to lose it. So they will be neither here nor there. They will be in the middle, and then they will face it. So we see a change in the way that these farming communities understand what the market is. What we also find is the change that they have seen with the caste and religious politics. That what they have realized is that their bargaining position is not going to come by adopting a religious identity, because within that they get part of a very large Hindu community or a very large, say, Muslim community. So their own interest as farming community will not be met through it, because the priorities of those politics are different than a politics where farmers themselves are political actors. So these are the reasons why we see that in Punjab. But interestingly, what is happening is that this movement this time is not very even, though it looks from, if you just follow the media, it looks like it's one single formation, one single farmers movement. Having been to all these protest sites, talking to large number of farmers, observing them, and also traveling to parts of Western UP, Haryana, and Punjab, I can tell you that this movement has 5 different formations, and these are all regional based. Punjab has one dynamics, and that dynamics is mixed with this idea of a crisis of Sikhism. They think that with the rise of the Hindu politics in India, and with the abrogation of 370 Act in Kashmir, that all of a sudden they have realized that they are minority in India, and if the farming goes away, which is the base of Punjab's economy, then entire Sikh community will be in crisis. So the Sikh identity is in crisis because it's linked to land and it's linked to agrarian economy. Because agriculture, what has happened, what they have used over the last in Punjab, over the last 20, 25 years or even 30 years after the liberalization, is that people have used their land and accumulation from the land, whatever profit they were making, to use that to go abroad. They were trying to go to Canada and various other countries. And if you go to Punjab and even if you go to Uttarakhand, Udham Singh Nagar and all these areas, you will continuously come across on the 2 things, that how to learn English and pass the IELTS and those exams. And second part is the immigration support, how to get visa and how to emigrate to. So there are a lot of those companies which will be advertising throughout all these places. Now they see that as a crisis, that if agriculture collapses, then all of these other things will not happen. And it will be a blow to the Sikh community themselves. In Haryana, they have made a transition to some extent. And what is the transition that has happened is that agricultural land here is now being used for real estate purposes. So most of the people know that urbanization will happen. Delhi and others will expand the way it has happened in Gurgaon, in the way it has happened in Noida. So when that expansion happens, they should be able to control so that the government cannot come and acquire their land at a cheaper price. They should be able to control that. And they should be able to get a better price for their agricultural land. So in a way, if you talk to the farmers here, psychologically they are out of agriculture. They see their land as an asset, which they are willing to sell for a good price. But that price they want to have a control. Again, from a bargaining position in an agricultural market, they are looking for bargaining position in the land market. That transition has happened. And this politics, what they have realized is, again, agriculture has to be done because that is what unites them together. Because the land market is happening in the future. It has not come. It might come, and they're organizing for it. The way to keep land in their hand and to increase their power is precisely using this farmers movement to consolidate themselves. And that's why it looks like a reassertion of the Jat community. Whereas in Western UP, the movement is relatively strong. So Rakesh Tikayat, who is, by the way, I forgot to tell you that why I told about 80 story, because all these old actors have resurfaced in this new movement. As I told you that if you see, there are all these BKUs with various brackets. And Rakesh Tikayat is the youngest son of Mahendra Singh Tikayat, who was the main farmers leader of 1980s. So we are seeing not only history repeating itself to some extent, but also the historical actors that they have re-emerged in this process. Rakesh, Western UP, for interestingly, is relatively weak. Why? Because the Jat community has moved more towards BJP there. So BJP has much more negotiating power with these communities. They that market, what they produce is wheat and sugarcane, and most of the wheat they have MSP. For sugarcane, MSP is declared, but government doesn't procure sugarcane. It is purchased by the sugarcane mills. So it is a direct relation of bargaining which happens with the sugar mills. So their politics is slightly different than the politics of farmers in Punjab and Haryana. So what we see there is that the movement is relatively weaker. So, so far it was sugarcane harvest season, so they were busy with that. And we haven't seen a vigorous movement which we see elsewhere. Then when you move to the southern Haryana, where you have lesser number of Jats and more Yadavs and other communities, including the Mio Muslims, their politics is different. They're also they are much more into the land market than the northern Haryana. And when you go to the eastern Rajasthan, you see the same kind of dynamics, which is a caste assertion, where the Minas and the Gujjars in power, and someone like Rajesh Pilot, son, Sachin Pilot, who is a Gujjar leader, now he is trying to reconfigure his political career within this. So he obviously uses this as a platform to come back and increase his power. So what we see is that on the face of it, you have the farmers fighting the state, but when you probe inside, you find all these formations. And this time what has happened is that what had happened earlier in the 1980s, the Mazgar kind of formation, where various social groups came together because all of their interests were defined by agriculture. After liberalization of 30 years, that is no longer the case. The communities are much more, the rivalry between the communities are much more. Many of the communities here don't own land, and they don't see any stake in this. So as a result, what happens is that these movements therefore look, if you go and probe, it will look as a much more controlled, not controlled, but it's the mobilization which has happened is most of the time are the dominant caste groups. So earlier in Mazgar, as I said, that you saw Muslim, Ahir, Jat, Gujjar, and Rajput, plus Dalit and Kashyap's. Now, if you go and see these formations, you will most probably find only the Jats and Gujjars. And Muslims have come back in Western UP, but they're very cautious because they know that they don't trust the Jats or Gujjars any longer. So two things have happened in the last, the 3M, the Mandir market and Mandal's effect has been the communities have split. There's distrust between them. The solidarity is gone, and all these communities have seen relative progress in their some of them have become more prosperous than others. Somebody is lagging behind, and all of that. So the solidarity right now is simply not there. At least I haven't found. What you see in Punjab is very different, because in Punjab it is the triangulation of religion and the caste, which then takes the founding identity. So Sikhism and Jat communities come to they overlap, and that's why you see the whole of Punjab being mobilized. But the moment you come to Haryana, you find that it's mostly the Jats who are fighting. If you go to the southern Haryana near the Rajasthan border, that's where you see the Yadavs, if they are part of it, they're part because they want to control their land. So are the Mio Muslims. They are trying to, they have been marginalized. So they are trying to reconfigure their relationship with other communities. In Rajasthan, again, you will see only mostly Gujars, few Minas coming together. And Western UP, again, you have only the Jats. Even the Gujars are not there in that number. So this, then what we see is from a massive social mobilization of various groups, we see some of the major groups coming together. And perhaps the reason why the Modi government has not stepped back is because I think they understand that all these social groupings which was happening in 1980s is no longer there. So it's basically the dominant caste groups, the Jats, with themselves are fighting and other groups are not with them. Therefore, they need not worry electorally, because electorally they might not be at the losing end. And because this farming, agriculture in India is so uneven that in most of the parts of the country, you don't have these rich farmers. Most of the country has small landholders who are not even bothered by it because they are already marginalized in such a way. They think that those communities think that whether it is corporatization or non-corporatization of agriculture, their lot is not going to improve massively. So they just need to hanging together with the existing political setup, which happens. So that's why you see, for instance, we saw West Bengal election, Mamata Banerjee coming back with a massive majority. The reason is that all the smallholders see that, okay, I have my regional party, which will protect me. So most of the time, the smallholders are looking for some regional party which will protect it. So I think that then makes it a very different political scenario where the farmers have launched this massive movement. In a way, the mobilization is much bigger from what I have read. I was looking at the archives and the mobilization which took place in 1980s, even the siege of Delhi in 1985, is much less than what is happening right now. The mobilization which happened in this was perhaps 5-10 times of that. Yet they have not been able to find a breakthrough in this. So I'll stop here. Any questions? Just unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, so I had one question. One question is that what is the possible solution to this going forward? I mean, of course, it's not possible to discuss the entire framework of the solution, but in what direction will the
crisis or resolving a political crisis?
Yeah, in what direction should we think? It's just that.
Yeah, no. You see, as a public policy student, this is something, because I come from politics side, so I will always try to impress you that don't think in terms of solution. Because what we have is a political debate. It depends on two groups fighting amongst each other. Now, what you can have is not a perfect solution. What you will have compromises and negotiation. Now, that negotiation which we had heard is that the government is willing to amend this act and also make it in such a way that the farmers' interest will be met, and at the same time the corporates can also exist. So coexistence is the government's had informally, when all the negotiations which they had, government had offered them, but the farmers are not willing to accept that because they think that this is just the beginning. Because if they start losing their bargaining power, they will face the same fate which happened after liberalization. That whatever bargaining position today they have, it will completely get eroded. So they need to stop it. So it's like a black and white fight which is going on. Not only that, I think Antara or somebody else had mentioned that the farmers wanted MSP to be legalized because they think that even that promise of government to have it as an executive order through which it does this MSP, that might also go away. So they want that to be legalized and all this act to be taken away. So that's why we still see the standoff But as I said, that when you look into the dynamics of this movement, when you try to understand the caste groups and all, it doesn't look like that the government is threatened by it. Government might lose. Punjab, BJP might lose Punjab election when it happens next year, but it's not quite bothered about it. It's bothered about UP, that whether it can retain UP, because UP is important. UP has 80 seats in the Lok Sabha, and similarly higher number in the Rajya Sabha, so it matters. So if you can control UP, then you can trade it off with Punjab or even Haryana. So I think that's why you will not see. Now, what Pramathesh is asking is that can public policy, and I'm just generalizing your question, that can we in public policy think beyond politics, interest politics, not this fight between groups, but can we take a neutral position somewhere outside and say, is there a better way of doing things? Is there a better way where we can agree to that this is a good thing to do, and then gradually we can mobilize rest of the interest groups in the society to accept that it is good for everyone, the so-called win-win formula. So in that case, I think in the farmers, the problem would be that whichever way you look at it, the corporatization has already begun. That has, when I'm saying that 75% of the agricultural produce is sold outside the mandis, means that these are sold and bought by various commissioning agents. So what is going to happen is the supply chains which will develop, which will get simplified. All the intermediaries will go out, and the companies, the names that you hear, they will consolidate their position. Now, India being such a huge market, it will be difficult to consolidate for 2 or 3 companies to control the entire market. So there is possibility in this. What might happen is the regional monopsonies might be created. Regional cartels, regional powerful 1 or 2 companies controlling, that might happen. That is actually happening right now in Himachal. With the apple produce of Himachal is controlled by only 1 or 2 companies. In fact, one person controls almost about 75 or 70% of apple trade in Himachal, which is the main producer of apple and that's why you perhaps see that apple prices doesn't go down even in the season in India any longer. So that is the fear which is there. Now within that, I think it's very difficult to see a solution. The laws will only accelerate this position. So even if government withdraws that, it's not going to stop this corporatization, this cartelization, cartel formation. These acts are accelerating this process. So in that, it's important to see that what can we do to assure the farmers that their interest will be met, or how you organize the farmers to counter it. Say, for instance, what the sugar mill, sugar cane farmers have done in Maharashtra, that they organize their own cooperatives, and through that they would fight this, any other formations. So they have private sugar mills, they can fight them, and with enough capital they can start their own sugar mills. So can you get the farmers, the problem here is that can you get the farmers to move up the value chain? Should the farmers only produce wheat and paddy, or should they also get into the processing of these food grains? Can that happen? If there is transition, so farmers, right now what we are seeing, here you have the farmers and then there's a supply chain going up to the Spencer Mall, right? All intermediaries in between. Now, we are seeing in a position where all these intermediaries goes on and the Spencer type of companies coming in directly interacting with the farmers. So that's the fear, that this is powerful, this is weak. Now, what if we start thinking that the farmer's position can also be enhanced, that they capture some part of this value chain which exists, right? Then it will not look, as of now, we don't have policies to create those. Though Government of India has a policy where they call it FPO, Farmers and Producers Organizations. I think that's what it is called. But those are very weak, policy measures. So I think when you are, because these policies that we have are about reorganizing the bargaining power in the society, so it's important to see that the other parties don't feel left out. You need to take care of the bargaining power. Now, when the farmers are up in arms and, not arms in that sense, like really angry and out in the street, you cannot simply say, oh, nothing will happen to you. Of course, something is going to happen to them, and they fear it and fear it rightly. So the point is that what are we doing to enhance their bargaining position? Then we'll not get into this black and white thing. Kala kanun le lo, bapis le lo, ye hope, and we'll get into this constant fight. And more than anyone else, I think people like us who now live in Sonipat will be very happy if the farmers, there's a resolution, because for the last 6 months, the border is closed. So we can't go to Delhi. We need to go through the village roads, and it takes a lot of time, which you can cross in half an hour. Now takes in 20 minutes it used to take. Now it takes more than an hour just to cross that border and go to Delhi, and then the usual thing happens. So our lives will become also, slightly better if this movement is withdrawn. There was somebody had put their hands up. Somebody, can you come back? Hello. I think Vedika, did you have your hands up?
No, sir, that was by mistake.
Okay. So anybody else? Any other question? Okay. Ravitej?
Good evening, sir. Thank you for the presentation. The one of the questions I wanted to ask is maybe we have broadly spoken about it, but why in other states, like even I'm from Telangana, like in Telangana or in AP or in other states in the south, it's not as much of an issue as it is in the north. Thank you.
No, as I said, that if you look into it depends on the APMC market and their functioning. So Punjab and Haryana, in Punjab, when I said that 75% of the agricultural produce is transacted outside APMC market, that's for all India. But when you look into Haryana and Punjab, the wheat and paddy, 75% of that is procured by the state. So the APMC markets are functional. Government is deeply involved into this process, and the government is purchasing it. So the farmers have seen the state, involvement of the state. Most of the other states, the state is absent from the lives of the farmers. The state, some subsidy here and there. Now there is this Prime Minister's this scheme where they send about 6,000 rupees per year to the farmers. So those are when the farmers see the state. But most of the time, the farmers meet private agents, the private traders. So the farmers themselves are not organized. Here, the farmers are well organized, even if they're split into, like 25 BKUs all over, but they're still organized, and they have shown that they can work between themselves and they can come because they want to maintain this structure. Whereas the rest of the country, you don't have the state, the minimum price is announced, but these are never implemented. The state is missing from procurement. Plus, what has happened, as I was telling you, that most of the rural areas are witnessing a change in terms of urbanization. So if you are in anywhere, say, around Bangalore and Mysore, increasingly the two cities are merging into the two. So if you are a farmer in between, then you know that your future will be, there will be no longer a village here, there will be a city. And then I'm going to get a good price. And will I be able to hold on to my land? So the farming communities, their interests are also shifting. That how do we control our land? This is something has been very successfully done by the Marathas in Western Maharashtra, in Pune and rest of the areas. Where if you go and see, the farming families gradually became the real estate developers. And they control the land there. So they have seen a transition. So in many places, the various kind of dynamics are taking place all over India. That's why you don't see this farmers movement being one single. So what it points to is that the farmer as an identity, that is in transition. Just because you own land and cultivate and produce doesn't necessarily mean that your interests are solely into it. You might be doing it for various purposes. One of the reasons why people still cultivate in, where I am sitting right now in Sonipat in southern, in the northern part of Delhi, we are on the border. Delhi is, I could perhaps show you, some of the outside my. Let me show you, and then you will realize what I'm trying to talk about. Can you see? Can you see buildings and other things? So this is where I live right now, which is also part of the Jindal real estate project. But this is where the new houses are coming up and all of that. And if you see, we also have paddy field right next to us. So that paddy field is cultivated not because they're interested in cultivating paddy, but they cultivate it so that they can keep the land in their hands, so that there's possession. Because in India, if you just leave the land fallow, then what will happen? Government will come and use the Land Acquisition Act and take away your land. Particularly, that is the fear which is there in this area. So you need to continuously cultivate. You need to maintain your identity of farmer, even when most of the family members are no longer into farming. They are into transport business, they are into some trade, they are running some shop, or they have a government job or anywhere, something else. But they need to continuously do that so that they can keep the land in their family. Because this land is extremely expensive here. 1 acre of land in this area is anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5 crore. So a family will have enormous amount of land. Like they will minimum have, say, 10 acres is very common. So the family has at least, say, 15 crore to 25 crore property. So they are not going to, let it go. They need to control that. Someone is asking, what about the MSP? MSP, the same thing, that there is a formula, how it is done. The farmers want it to be legalized, to be enacted so that there's guarantee, like right to fair price or something like that, the way right to education, right to information, all of those things are there. So they also want a right to minimum support price. But government is unwilling. So are most of the policymakers. Even the policymakers who are sympathetic to the farmers, you will find them that they are not in favor of legalizing, because it is very difficult for, according to them, to regulate that, which I think is not necessarily so, because that even if you legalize as I was saying, that we are thinking in this way, that this supply chain will become shorter. The big corporates will come and then they will negotiate with the farmers, and farmers are threatened by that. We are not thinking that how we can bring the farmers up in the chain, how we can create, so MSP, you can create, the farmers union can be, you can create condition where they start producing or processing the grains. They can start, all that you need to do finally is to clean up grain and put it in a plastic bag. Now that's something the farmers themselves can do. Why should you need a company to come and do that and put their label and charge massive amount of money? So I think so that's what the policy resolution is not. So MSP. So to answer your question, yes, MSP is an issue. MSP remains an executive order, not a law. But I think making it a law is not necessarily a bad thing, because that at least assures the farmers that you are not left on your own. The policy making apparatus is with you to help you. Okay, anyone else? Last question. Yeah. Anyone? Okay, since there's no questions, so thank you very much, and I will see you maybe around, I don't know when is, most probably on 17th August, so about 3 weeks from now. We will again meet, and I'll be teaching you governance and state. So many of these things that we discussed today will again come back. How do you understand what is governance, what is state? The most difficult thing in the world to explain or to understand, because state doesn't exist. You have government, right? You have government of India, government of Tamil Nadu, government of Haryana, but what is state? Is there a state of India? What is state? State of India doesn't exist. But we use the word state. It has extremely powerful concept. So what it is? How do we understand? What is politics? What is its relationship with policy? And as I was telling you that policy, politics, and democracy, there seem to be a relationship between the two. And if it is so, then what is governance? How it is different from politics? Those are the things we will do. There is also another element, I'm just telling you right away, that another component which is there called technology. So, the use, we'll try to understand the use of technology. Right now, you have co-win and all of that. You see everywhere Aadhaars popping up. Without Aadhaar, you can't think. Then Jan Dhan account, mobile phones, various kind of. You can apply to most of the things nowadays online. So, what does it mean? What kind of? Then you have direct benefit transfer. So we are seeing a change in the governance, how the state. Again, this nebulous concept called state relates to the citizens through the mediation of technology. So that is something we will do. That is a new component this year that I will teach. But it also depends on the time, because we don't know whether we'll have enough time to get into all of that. But anyway, I'll see you on 17th of August. Have a good time. Till then, enjoy. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.